In my previous videos, I presented irrefutable evidence of life after death and explained where we go after it. I also clarified what dreams really are and showed the tragic consequences that befall those who commit suicide after their death. I shared several NDE stories that I've gathered over more than 20 years of studying the phenomenon of death and life beyond the material body. If you haven't seen them yet, I encourage you to click on my channel name and the video tab, where you'll find all the films I've created so far. In this episode, I'll present to you the first NDE story I ever heard from someone who personally experienced it. It was told to me by a girl I went to high school with many years ago. This is the story of an occultist who experienced clinical death after falling downstairs in an abandoned factory while performing dark rituals. The terrifying experiences she endured during this event completely transformed her, for the better, of course. After hearing this story, I became even more intensely interested in the topic of life after the death of the material body. Let's begin. First, a little introduction from me, and shortly I'll share her story as I remember it. The girl in question was considered strange in class, and some even called her possessed. She listened to heavy metal music and dressed in black, which wasn't all that unusual at the time. However, her fascination with the occult was unsettling. Sometimes she would talk about it at school, which only alienated her from others. Because of this, she was quite isolated. In our class, she didn't have anyone to spend her free time with, but outside of it, she had a small group of friends with similar views. I remember once she was absent from school for over a week, and when she returned, her hand was injured. But it wasn't her hand that caught everyone's attention. It was her clothing. It was ordinary, plain. She no longer wore black combat boots, heavy metal clothing, or intense makeup. Some people asked what had happened to her, but she didn't want to reveal the reason for her transformation. Some of the more spiteful students mocked her, saying her dad probably forbade her from dressing that way. But when her behavior also changed significantly, I knew something important must have happened. She became much more open and friendly. She no longer scared anyone with her dark stories, so in a relatively short time, she integrated with the rest of the class and started being treated more normally. I also got to know her better and found that she had become a very likable girl. We grew close enough that she joined my group of friends, and we spent time together outside of school. One day we went to a bonfire with a large group of friends. There were sausages, music, and of course alcohol. After we had a bit to drink, the conversation turned to the topic of her sudden transformation. Interestingly, she led the conversation in that direction herself, even though she usually didn't want to talk about it. I got the impression she wanted to get it off her chest and felt I was trustworthy enough or to be one of the first people she shared her story with. We stepped aside and she began her tale.
I've always liked dark themes. Night was my time because that's when I felt I could be myself. Maybe I got it from my older brother, who also had that kind of personality. I definitely got my taste in music and love for metal from him. I wanted to be part of his group of metalhead friends, but he never took me to their gatherings. They were always wandering around at night, and I wanted to do the same. Eventually, one day, I followed them. I secretly tailed them so they wouldn't see me. We went to a nearby forest. At first, I was scared to go in alone after them, but I loved the night so much that I quickly overcame my fear. They went deep into the forest and lit candles arranged in a circle. Then they took out some wine and passed it around. Afterward, one of my brother's friends pulled out a book and started reading. I think it was written in Latin. I was incredibly excited because I love such so dark and mysterious things. When the reading finished, they all began chanting some kind of prayer, or incantation, also in Latin. Then they played some music and just talked and drank wine. So I went back home. The next day, I blackmailed my brother, telling him I'd tell our parents about everything if he didn't start taking me with him. At first, he was furious, but he knew I wasn't joking, so he had no choice but to initiate me into their dark world. Interestingly, his friends accepted me willingly, especially Sandra, as she was the only other girl in the group. I started dressing in black like her. Not just my clothes, but also my makeup, nails, and even my hair eventually darkened. Some people looked at me with concern, others with pity, but I didn't care. This group gave me something I had been missing, a sense of belonging. I finally felt like I was part of something bigger, that I wasn't alone. With their help, I began delving into the world of the occult, and eventually even Satanism. Together, we performed various dark rituals. One autumn night, we decided to explore an abandoned building we'd heard about from others. It was an old factory that had been shut down years ago and had been standing empty ever since. It was located on the outskirts of town, far from any buildings and surrounded by dense forest. We gathered everything we needed and set off after dusk. The journey was long and tiring, leading us through the forest. When we arrived, the old factory greeted us with dead silence. It was a huge, multi-story brick building. The windows were broken, and the roof had collapsed in some places. I remember the moonlight streaming through the holes, creating an incredible sight. We were all in awe. We went inside and started preparing for our rituals. I won't describe them in detail, because now they seem not only incredibly foolish, but also dangerous. In any case, after the rituals, we were all a bit drunk. My brother wanted to explore the remnants of the first floor. Naturally, I followed him. The stairs were still in decent shape, so we climbed up. I was holding onto the railing for support. I was almost at the top when the railing broke, and I fell down these stairs. I managed only to scream before everything went dark. I didn't feel like I was lying on the ground. In fact, I felt like I was floating in the air. After a moment, an image emerged from the darkness, and I saw everything as if I were on the upper floor. The candles burning below, the moonlight, and the darkness of the factory. I thought maybe I had imagined falling, but that wasn't the case. My body was lying below. Everyone immediately rushed to me trying to help. They were panicking because I wasn't responding. I felt sorry for them because I could see they didn't know what to do. Suddenly, I heard a whisper. I was terrified because someone was whispering the incantation we had just been chanting together earlier. Then I saw a hooded figure in black standing near the circle of candles and the pentagram in the center. I froze in shock. I was probably more panicked than those trying to help my body. When the figure finished reciting the words, it began muttering something in a raspy, sinister voice while slowly raising its head. That's when I saw its face beneath the hood. It somewhat resembled a human face, but the head was more rounded, and it barely had a nose. The skin was grey, and half of its face was marked with symbols or writing in blue. It was looking at me and muttering in a grim tone. I began to hear its thoughts as if they were being translated to me telepathically. The figure reminded me of all the times we had summoned it during our rituals. It had come every time, but in vain, because we couldn't complete the ritual correctly. The instructions we had found and were using were apparently wrong or incomplete. But the figure didn't care about that. It demanded payment for the debt we had incurred by summoning it so many times. It said it would take me to a world where I could repay the debt. I wondered how I was supposed to repay it. And then the figure sent me the answer. You will kill and destroy for me. I began screaming that I didn't agree, that I wouldn't go anywhere with it, that I had never signed up for something like this. I started calling for my brother to help, but he couldn't hear me. The figure started floating toward me, smiling ominously. In desperation, I began calling on God for help. I deeply regretted performing those rituals and wished I could turn back time. I felt an overwhelming desire to be a good person, to be close to God so He could protect me. Suddenly, a bright, white light appeared above me. It was like an explosion of light, flooding everything in an instant. I couldn't see anything but the light, but I felt immense love. I sensed that someone friendly was surrounding me with care and protection. Then, suddenly, the light vanished, and it was dark again. But this time, I started feeling different. I began to feel my physical body. It was very painful. I opened my eyes, and as my vision cleared, I saw my brother and the others standing over me. I saw the immense relief and joy on their faces. They were all asking me what hurt, and if I could get up. I started moving my arms and legs. Surprisingly, only my left hand seemed to be injured. I stood up on my own and told them we needed to leave as quickly as possible. They gathered their things in no time, and my brother helped me as we made our way out. On the way back, I simply told them never to perform those rituals again. The next day, I told my brother the full story, and a few days later, I shared it with the rest of the group. They were just as terrified as I was, so of course we stopped performing the rituals and completely lost interest in the occult and Satanism.
I have to admit, when she told me this story in the middle of the dark forest, I got chills. I was so stunned that I didn't know how to respond. After a moment, I said something like, "It's good you have put it behind you, and that someone or something came to your aid." To which she replied that she would never forget the feeling of love she experienced from that being, and that she wanted to live in such a way that similar feelings would accompany her as often as possible. She could see that I was completely stunned, so she smiled and suggested we return to the others by the bonfire. I stayed friends with her for a few more years, but eventually she moved to England and we lost contact. For weeks after the bonfire, her story kept haunting me. It gave me a lot of insight and directed my own spiritual pursuits in the right direction. Even back then, I had some knowledge about spirituality since I had been intensely interested in it for a while. From the age of 14, I had started having lucid dreams and out-of-body experiences. And honestly, after hearing her story, I took a break from those journeys because I was afraid of encountering such terrifying entities in the non-material realms. But eventually I returned to practicing lucid dreaming and OOBEs, and instead of fearing these kinds of beings, I learned how to handle such encounters in the non-material worlds. If you too would like to learn these techniques, and most importantly, if you'd like to learn how to achieve lucid dreams and travel beyond the material body, I encourage you to check out my publication. It contains all the knowledge I've gathered about life beyond the material body over more than 20 years of research and personal experiences. The link to purchase it is in the description below the video. You'll also find my email address, where you can send your own NDE experiences or other stories related to spirituality. That's all for today. Thank you so much for being here, and see you next time.